she was racing the run leg, and in her left hand was a breast pump, and she was pumping breast milk for her 6 months old daughter while she was doing the toughest one-day endurance event in the world, the Ironman Triathlon. That woman is none other than Sierra Winters.
I'd actually signed up for the Chattanooga Iron Man in 2023 and found out that I was pregnant with my daughter. So I had her carry a bottle, and then I took my bottle, unscrewed it from the pump, poured it off into her bottle, and then took my pump back and kept running. It's a way to come back to my center and find who I am outside of my obligations to other people.
Cycling again, cycling alone as a woman on highways for long distances, it's not very, very safe.
Aunties in both cultures telling me this is what you need to do, this is how you need to breastfeed, empty one breast before you empty the other, or go to both.
And of all things, marrying somebody from Bollywood who's an actor, how is that life?
Yeah,
for you?
it's much different than my life in North Carolina.
Welcome to yet another episode of HerHealth Talks. For me, the most striking and memorable image of 2024 was that of a woman triathlete doing the Ironman. She was racing the run leg, and in her left hand was a breast pump, and she was pumping breast milk for her 6 months old daughter while she was doing the toughest one-day endurance event in the world, the Ironman Triathlon. That woman is none other than Sierra Winters, and I'm really so excited to have her today and to ask her all about how is it possible to race a triathlon just 6.5 months postpartum. How is it possible to remain active during pregnancy? How is it possible to travel across continents, to marry somebody totally outside your culture and community and country, and yet thrive and make achievements that make not only her family but the entire women proud. Thank you, Sierra. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. Tell me all about it. Tell me about that day in Chattanooga where you did the full Ironman, and how was it?
Thank you for having me, first of all. That introduction made my ears burn. You could write my resume for me. But yes, it was, starting with the Ironman, it was one of the most magical experiences of my life and definitely the highlight of my 2024. It was a long time coming. I'd actually signed up for the Chattanooga Iron Man in 2023 and found out that I was pregnant with my daughter. She was an IUD baby, a miracle. My IUD fell into my cervix, didn't know, and all of a sudden there was little Tara on the sonogram. And I actually had spoken to you. Should I race this triathlon? Is it safe for the baby? And I ultimately decided, because I do like to do things wholeheartedly and I like to go to the max effort, I thought, okay, I'll postpone the triathlon until 2024. Thankfully, Ironman had that deferral policy in place by that time. So I raced the Ironman in September. I had actually done a previous Ironman in Israel, and I couldn't finish the run because of some gut issues. So it felt extremely sweet to finally finish this race that I'd been hoping to finish for years. And what made it even more magical is that my daughter was there. I got to kiss her on the run leg. I got to see her as I was cycling past. And she gave me such strength. And of course, my husband and my mom were both there as well. And I think at the end of the day, for me, Ironman it's not an individual sport. It's about the family and the friends who are there alongside you.
Right.
And I'm so grateful that I got to do it.
But it's a very challenging time that you choose. A child just takes over your body and soul and everything, every cell of your body. And while we like to believe that you deliver a child, but actually that cord is never cut.
Yeah.
So while you are breastfeeding, practically your baby is still a part of you, like an organ which is living outside.
Right.
And you undertook the toughest Ironman. Chattanooga is one of the difficult courses to do in Ironman. So what were the challenges like? What was the day like?
Yeah. So actually, in the first 6 months when she was exclusively breastfeeding, it was a greater toll on my body than I think I even gave myself credit for.
Right.
it zaps your energy. Even if you do nothing else in the day besides feed a baby and diaper the baby, you can feel exhausted. So then to put training into the equation, yeah, some days got kind of long, but luckily I had the support system around me. But when it came to the race itself, the biggest dilemma for me was, how can I go potentially up to 15 hours without breastfeeding, without expressing milk? Actually even more, because in an Ironman, typically you have 17 hours to finish. Right. So I had reached out to the support team when I had begun training and asked them, I'd read in an email on Women's Day on March 8th that there would be some kind of accommodations for women who needed to pump or needed to breastfeed, some kind of lactation stations. Right. And I got a slightly unsatisfactory email in response, and didn't seem like I would be getting much support from Ironman. And each race is different, so it's always worth it to reach out and ask the staff. And if they don't give you the answer you want, you can go higher up. But I thought, I'll just carry a breast pump with me on the run, potentially have one in my transition bag. So I had thought I'd have 2 breast pumps, one for after the swim and one for the run. Ended up that there was a terrible hurricane that went through the area the same weekend as the triathlon. So they canceled the swim leg, which made my life easier because the race became that much shorter. Right. So I ended up cycling, and I breastfed my baby just before I started. Then I did the cycling leg. It took me, I think, 5.5 hours. And then I pulled out my pump in the transition area, and I came out of the transition area pumping. I only got maybe 1.5 ounces. At that point, you're pretty dehydrated. So you're lucky if you get anything. But my mom was there with my baby at the first mile marker, and so I was very cognizant. I can't litter. I can't give her anything because that might be considered outside support. Right. So I had her carry a bottle, and then I took my bottle, unscrewed it from the pump, poured it off into her bottle, and then took my pump back and kept running. So I ran with the pump the entire race, and it's very convenient, the hand pump. They're small. A few times it fell apart and I had to pick it up. But ultimately it was a wonderful experience because there were several women who saw it, recognized what it was, and cheered for me as I ran and said, "Go, Mom." And I felt like such a sense of community with them to be able to connect on that level. Just by seeing a pump in my hand, they felt a connection with me. It was magical.
And I think you made it so much tougher for yourself, but probably you made it easier for many, many women, who probably don't even contemplate an Ironman. That's because, you're pregnant and you're lactating and you're practically postpartum for not just 1.5 years. My sons are grown up, maybe your age, but I still feel postpartum. So, do you think it's really a barrier for women who don't even contemplate entering? Because, when you are younger, you sign up for a race and you start preparing for it. Sometimes it's 6 months, 1 year before you register, and then things change. Sometimes you discover that you've conceived. So do you think some things need to change with the race directors and people who are at the helm of affairs in triathlon to get in more women?
Yeah, absolutely. And the first place I would say to look for tips on how to improve your race, if you are a race director, is an organization called She Races. They've done a lot of work with trail running and even road running. And now they're getting into triathlon. And that makes me very, very relieved and excited to see the work that they've been doing there. They've just done a big research survey, I think with about 1,000 women they've surveyed, mostly in the UK. But hopefully it'll spark research around the world. They actually have a branch in Chennai. They worked with some runners there. And, there's so many factors to get women more involved in races, and it can be anything from cost. The cost barrier can be more difficult for women than for men, considering the different incomes that we have, the disparity. And then also there are little things like race logistics. What do you do with your child? Even if you're doing a smaller triathlon, Olympic distance, who's going to take care of your child for 5 hours? And then there's also a lot of women have faced disparaging comments from men as they've raced, and can actually get physically dangerous. Women have reported that on the biking leg, there's a lot of men who will come too close to them or tail them, and that's not the case between men and other men. And finally, of course, pregnancy deferrals were very integral in my experience. I would have preferred to have deferred Chattanooga 2 years so that it could have been a little bit easier on my body. But at the time, Ironman was only offering 1-year deferrals. They've since changed that to 2-year deferrals. But other races, you know, they're either ambiguous about their policies or not everybody on the team is on the same page. So there needs to be very clear guidelines for each race about what they can do to support women who are returning to exercise after pregnancy, after delivery, and making that timeline longer, at least 2 years.
Absolutely.
Ideally 3.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, this is about the race day. Also, many of us are really afraid that, you know, on the race day, your periods decide to make an appearance, and which happens with so many of us. So on my first Ironman in Busselton, I got my periods the same morning that I did the triathlon. And because I'm one of the people at the end of the pack, so, you know, it took me 16 hours to finish it. And it was not easy because there's no designated place. Also, periods are very different for different women. For some, it's a breeze. For some, it's very difficult. And for many women in their late 30s and their 40s, it actually gets worse as you age. So what's your take on, you know, having period products and more women-friendly races when it comes to period products?
So that is something that She Races is working on. And any race that becomes She Races accredited has to provide period products on the course, ideally at the aid stations, if not at the beginning and the end of the race itself. I have also had same experience as you. I think at 3 races in a row, actually, I had gotten my period. And one of them, not to bring Ironman into it again, it just happened to be another Ironman race. It was at Ironman, North Carolina, 70.3 distance. So thankfully it wasn't too long, but I had gotten my period the day before. The second day is always the worst for me. So I was cramping some already, but I thought, okay, adrenaline will kick in. It won't be so bad. That said, I still was worried about bleeding through because, you know, triathlon kits are these thin pieces of material. And there's not that many porta-johns to go into and change. And then how do you carry the products in your back pocket? They might get wet. Lots of factors. It's not easy for a woman to carry menstrual products on the course. I ended up getting to the end of the race and I didn't have my bag readily accessible. So I asked somebody in the medical tent, actually, you know, thinking surely there has to be some kind of accommodation. They have to have a pad somewhere. And they said, no, ma'am, sorry. And they gave me this thick chunk of medical gauze.
Oh my God.
How do I use this? So yeah, I think to begin with, there's just not a lot of awareness, especially when men are the race directors and organizing the accommodations. They just, and I don't blame them necessarily, but it's just not the first thing that comes to mind. And for women, it immediately comes to mind because we have to deal with it 1 week out of every 4 weeks of the month.
Absolutely.
And like you said, it can be different for each woman. Each experience is different. I don't necessarily have an answer for what do we do if a woman gets her period on a race and has such debilitating pain that she can't race. I'm not sure. And I think that's something that we need to be asking ourselves and discussing because, you know, maybe there could be more deferrals for that case in particular.
True. Also about training, you know, training for a triathlon is not easy, especially in India. There's hardly any open waters which are clean and safe enough. There's also very little company except in, you know, few spots here and there where you have, like in Mumbai, you have the Mumbai Sea Swimmers. It's few and far between. Cycling again, you know, cycling alone as a woman on highways for long distances, it's not very, very safe. So that also is a barrier for women. You know, you see a lot of women in running because running still, there are lots of running groups. But in triathlon, all these 3 sports and the distance that the full Ironman entails, that is also a barrier for many women who want to, but they cannot.
Yeah.
How was it like for you to train in India?
I would say that podcasts were very helpful. So if anybody listening to this needs a way to stay engaged, listen to your podcast more. But you're right. I did have a running group that I met early in my days of being in Mumbai, and I don't necessarily still train with them, but I see them from time to time, members, and I say hi as I run. I do train pretty much entirely on my own. Luckily, I grew up with a swimming background. I think I was in the pool by the time I was 2 or 3 years old. And then cycling, I started when I was in high school. Running, I started when I was 10, 11 years old. So I hadn't put all of the sports together until I got to college, but I have a long history with each.
Yes.
Good background. So I feel comfortable being in the pool. I feel comfortable riding.
Right.
But in Mumbai, I don't ride outside. I am sometimes on my trainer for 6 hours a day in one place. Fans on, air conditioning is on. Maybe I'm watching something, listening to something. But I find that my form of meditation, actually. My mom calls me a hamster. I can run the same half-mile route over and over and over again. And maybe that's a product of being in the pool for so many years as a kid. I was just swimming the same 25 meters back and forth and back and forth. I personally love it. I think that it's also a good chance to get off of our phones when we're in the water for an hour. You know, you're not checking Instagram, scrolling. And again, that's why it's a form of meditation for me. It's not the same as meditation, of course, not trying to say it is, but it's a way to come back to my center and find who I am outside of my obligations to other people.
Right. So most of your training in Mumbai was indoors, probably because of also the climate and the traffic.
Pollution, heat, humidity, traffic, yeah, everything was indoors. So typically when I travel for a race, I ideally have a month beforehand that I spend in North Carolina, where I'm from originally in the US. That way I can do a little bit of outdoor riding, because being on a bike is totally different outdoors than it is indoors.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of road handling, and even being on aero bars, you actually need to do it on the road at least for a few times before you actually get into the race.
Yeah, and for anybody who's just starting to cycle, I think it's important to know that you don't have to be 100% comfortable on a bicycle before you get into a race. I remember for the first 4 years that I was riding, and I mean, I've ridden a bicycle all my life, but the 4 years that I was seriously riding, it took me that long to get comfortable with getting a water bottle out of my bike holder and sipping on it and putting it back.
It's very difficult to believe.
I've still not mastered getting food out of my back pocket. Some people are very, it comes to them like that, but to me it doesn't. And that's okay. You don't have to look like a pro in order to perform well and to have a good time.
Absolutely. And these body image issues, I think they plague us women much more. I remember I did my first half in Astana in Kazakhstan. And I remember standing there, and I was actually very fat, relatively very unfit. And I saw around me all these ribbed, typical triathletes, and especially all the Russians and the Kazakhs, big 6 feet people, very muscular. And I really remember feeling so out of place and questioning myself, do I even belong here? So I think these, how do you think should women tackle these body image issues when we get into triathlon? Because, you're wearing that flimsy tri-suit and all the stomach rolls and the side rolls and the jiggly thighs, everything is showing. That also is at least it was a barrier for me when I got into triathlon.
Correct.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat, there needs to be more representation in terms of advertising races. There's not enough images of women, first of all, but we need to have greater diversity of body types. From a personal perspective, I struggled with a little bit of disordered eating myself in the past. It was, probably 7-8 years ago now. And triathlon is actually what helped me get out of that pattern of disordered eating, particularly the aspect of community that I found and the team that I was on. Just remembering that sport is supposed to be fun and it's not just a way to lose weight. And I also saw when I went to races that in my own experience and observing others, sometimes the more weight you have on your body, the better you can actually perform. It's not always about being the most aerodynamic, skinniest little twig that you can be. In fact, I find greater power when I'm getting more protein in. When I have a little bit of fat on me, it's okay. A lot of triathletes will intentionally gain weight so that when they do have to get into their heaviest periods of training, it's not as much of a risk to their body if they're losing and they can't keep up with it. And coaches will tell them, eat ice cream before you go to bed. You need to keep the weight on.
And I agree on this because, for the first 40 years of my life, I always saw food as the enemy, something which has to be restricted. It's something to be scared of. It'll make you fat. It's only after I got into triathlon and started doing longer rides, longer runs, that actually, you are supposed to eat all the carbs that you've avoided your life. They are your lifesavers. You can eat as much as you want on the bike. You can have all the khichdi that you want at night, or you can have all the bread and the pasta that you like. So I think that my relationship with food totally changed after I came into triathlon. It became my friend. It became my fuel. And definitely it's not that it's a license to eat anything and everything that you want, but that shift in perspective was a big deal for me. Similarly for my body, I used to always be very critical of how I looked, but now whenever I start feeling critical, I tell myself that this is a body which has done 16 hours non-stop. So it's not how it looks, but it's what it can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Your body is a tool through which you live.
Yes.
And it's a temple. It's not it's not an enemy to be had. But I will say that, of course, extreme exercise does bring out disordered tendencies in many folks. And it's so critical to seek help. I saw a counselor for several years when I was going through the worst of my mental health issues. And I came out all the better for seeing somebody, for asking for help. And I don't know, in India, I think it's starting to become more normal, but it was a taboo for a long time, my husband tells me. So don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to talk about it. We need to break down the taboos about our body images. And a lot of men don't understand. Like, I talked to my husband about the body image issues that I've had in the past. And I think for them, it's not the same. Skinny image has not been sold to them all their lives.
Yes.
So it can be difficult to understand and comprehend and have that embodied experience. And that's why we have to talk to not just our partners, not just our parents, but talk to a professional as well.
Right. Coming back to your pregnancy, I mean, Ironman is not 6 months, it's not 1 year, it's what you've done for the last decade maybe with your body. So how was it like in your pregnancy? How did you remain active in pregnancy? And how did you navigate the, so many fingers that point at you and, what are you doing? It'll harm your baby.
Well, when we go back to lifestyle, no worries. I've never been somebody to go out and party. So I remember I had one glass of wine before I found out I was pregnant. And I was just thanking my stars that I wasn't somebody who would, chug on alcohol because I didn't want to harm my baby, of course. So there wasn't many lifestyle changes that I actually had to pursue. So alcohol wasn't one of them. I am 100% vegan in the US and I'm 90% vegan in India. So I didn't really have to give up some more the typical foods like fish. A lot of women had to be careful about, and certain meats. So that wasn't an issue for me. The only thing that I really changed perhaps was my approach to exercise. I incorporated more strength work. I've been doing strength maybe once, twice a week in the past, but I got the Peloton app on my phone, and I love Peloton. They have a series specifically for mothers who are going through pregnancy or who are newly postpartum, and it focuses on pelvic floor strength and abdominal strength and ways that you can stay strong, stay fit, cardiovascularly fit as well, while still staying within reasonable limits. And there's research that has been coming out recently that says you don't need to stick to, like, we have an RPE scale in triathlon of 1 to 10. You don't have to stick to RPE of 1 to 5. You can go up to 9 out of 10 on your exertion level, and it is still perfectly safe for the baby. So I was cycling, doing spin classes until week 35 of my pregnancy. And the only reason I stopped is because my belly literally got too big for my knees to come up. But I loved those spin classes. I was doing, they're called body pump classes, so Les Mills brand of strength training. I was doing that with big bars on my back. I loved swimming, of course, many pregnant women do. I didn't run. I realized pretty early on, after week 7 or 8, it just wasn't comfortable for me. And there's a lot of Instagram sensations now about pregnant women who are running, and all the more power to them. But it's not for everybody. Everybody's different. Body's different. Right. Everybody's babies are different. They carry them differently, and different strengths that you may have before pregnancy come into play. So I didn't compare myself to anybody else. I thought, what feels good in my body? What do I want to think about in terms of after pregnancy? What kind of strength do I want to have? Getting up off of the floor with a baby, you need to have single arm strength. You need to have the calf muscles, the flexibility. So I incorporated all of that into this well-rounded training plan that I constructed for myself.
Right. So, did your doctor give the clearance? Because most of us doctors, we are very, very skeptical when women ask us if they can exercise, if they can go for a run, if they can go to a gym. So, were you lucky to find a doctor who would support you?
Yeah. So when we found out that I was pregnant, it was confirmed at 5 weeks and 5 days, I believe. One of the first questions I asked, of course, is, can I do that Ironman in 2 months? And my doctor said, yes, of course. Be careful about heat. It is a little bit of a risk factor when you're pregnant that you don't want the fetus to be exposed to too extreme heat. Because of dehydration for the mom. But other than that, they said I was good to go. I ended up cycling. I was set to embark on a 4-week-long cycling trip the very next week after I found out I was pregnant. And I was in tears. I think I'd fundraised $3,000 for this trip. It was through an organization called Bike and Build. So we would take 6 or 7 days to build houses for folks along a 900-mile route. We were doing it in Washington and Oregon in the U.S. I was able to go on that. I didn't tell anybody on the trip that I was pregnant. I didn't know what the liability was. So I told them at the end, and it was beautiful. We had 20 riders, and they nicknamed my baby rider 21. We joked that she was with me the entire time. And coincidentally, before I found out I was pregnant, I did a half Ironman distance race. Oh. And she was only, my baby was about a week old probably at that point, like just a few cells. But we will forever tell her that she was with me for that half Ironman.
So the first Ironman in her life was really very early.
And I won. I got first place. So she won too.
Yes. Maybe you won because of her.
Yeah, of course.
Amazing. Postpartum, being in India and being an Indian bahu, how was it like compared to having your postpartum in the US?
So we actually went to the US to have Thara. She was born there. Then we spent 3 months, April, May, June. Yeah, 3 months there with her because it's just easier to have an American passport. Yeah. So we did it for logistical reasons. And then I came back to India. And there are different cultural practices at play in both countries. And, of course, we all know that everybody wants to tell you how to parent a child in those first few months and what's right, what's wrong. And so multiply that by 2. Now I have aunties in both cultures telling me this is what you need to do. This is how you need to breastfeed, empty one breast before you empty the other or go to both. And, lots of conflicting information. What it all boiled down to in the end is the same thing as what I did with my training. I have to listen to my body. I have to listen to my baby's body. I have to listen to the connection that we have. And there's so much intuition that we underplay, and the mother knows. The mother knows. You don't have to go to Google. You don't have to go to Instagram, watch reels. Just trust yourself. Of course, there are times where you'll need to ask for medical advice, and you'll need to ask other moms. I was lucky to have my mom around me for the first 3 months. Right. You have to ask sometimes for tips, but ultimately just trusting yourself. And sometimes the mother knows best why it is that the baby's crying, and you learn that slowly too. So you might not have all the answers at first, but in time they will come, and that patience it's so critical. In terms of practices, like in India, we had these ladus.
Yes.
Yeah, I quite loved them. But I also was encouraged to think by my husband about factors of hot and cold when it came to food. So I think after pregnancy, he was encouraging me to have more, I think, was it heating foods after pregnancy and cooling foods during pregnancy? That doesn't always come intuitively to me because I was not raised in a culture where foods are termed hot or cold. I thought hot food meant soup, cold food meant ice cream. So again, that was a little bit of a learning curve, but I find it fascinating that I had this opportunity to learn from both cultures and to have the information there for me to pick and choose what was essential to me. And then finally, one last note is I believe it's in a magazine called Bon Appetit. It's a food magazine. Mm-hmm. I was reading it this past summer and stumbled across a section that I just found delightful. It was about specifically a recurring theme of women who share the foods that they eat postpartum and how meaningful those foods can be. So the article that I had read was about a woman in, I think it was in Korea, mm-hmm. Or somewhere in East Asia for sure, about how her mom brought her the foods that she needed after delivering her child for the first month. Definitely it was healing food, heating food. So that just, it reminded me that every culture is different. So you can't say this is right, this is wrong. You have to think what is right for my body, what is right for my baby.
Right. You're a triathlete and you had a very interesting life. You shifted from US to India and Mumbai. So how do you think as triathletes, we always find the unexpected. There's no race where anything or everything goes according to plan.
Of course.
So do you think being a triathlete helped in this transition or vice versa?
So the night before the Chattanooga Iron Man, my mom told me, I've never seen you like this. I was in tears. I was so afraid that I wouldn't finish because the way that they changed the race after the swim was canceled is everybody started according to their bib number. Mm-hmm. And I was in the last 30 athletes to start. I was at the back of the pack. And I'm used to I'm a great swimmer. So I'm usually at the front of the bike leg and men are passing me, women are passing me. It's okay, whatever. I at least got out at the start and I had that comfort, that cushion. So starting at the back, I was like, what if I have a flat tire? What if I had 2 flat tires in Israel? So I was like, what if I have 2 flat tires? So I had 3 air cartridges in my saddlebag, and every negative possibility was running through my head. That's usually not who I am. I usually have a pretty positive outlook. I'm grounded. I'm not, worrying about everything. But for some reason the day before I was, maybe it was hormones, maybe it was just nerves. I was so nervous. And, I had, I think, 16 and a half hours to finish, maybe 15 and a half. Mm-hmm. So it was 14, 15, 16 hours yes. because they canceled the swim. And I thought I might take every single minute of that. I ended up finishing in 10 and a half hours. And it just reminds me, and I have experiences like that all the time in sports where, you think the worst might happen and then it doesn't. And that translates to my life as well. It just reminds me to not have a negative outlook, to hope for the best, because 80% of the time, the best actually does happen. There's no point in worrying. In triathlon, there's so many factors. 3 sports, so much equipment, so many competitors, dangers. You can think about weather. Oh, weather. Gosh, I could go on about weather. But ultimately, it's in God's hands. And at the end of the day, it's really just a sport. It's not the end of the world if you don't finish. Like in Israel, I told you, I didn't finish the race. And that was okay. I knew at the end of the day that I gave it my best. I was happy I had come. I had a great vacation. I got to go to the Dead Sea afterwards, float in the water. My husband was there. My mom was there again. It was great. So just not taking the sport so seriously, not taking life so seriously. There's a lot of interplay there.
Right. And I think the times that we don't finish, I could not finish the swim in Barcelona in my first Ironman attempt. And I think that actually made me stick to the sport. If I would do very well at that race, probably would have been one and done. But that failure actually brought me back again to the board. I attempted another one 3 months later. So I think it's those failures that make triathlon what it is.
Absolutely. I agree.
And it's the unpredictability which is probably the crux why all of us love that, because despite our best preparations, anything can fall apart at any time.
And you see that in pro races as well.
Yes.
It's hard to say who is the best in the world because we have so many factors in different phases of our life. I find it so inspiring, women who start at older ages. Like my mom started when she was in her 40s doing Ironmans. And for some people, that's better for their body type. And I'm sure you see this all the time with athletes that are a little bit older. They're able to handle the sport in different ways, not just physically, but also mentally.
Yes.
And after you have a baby, the mental strength that you have, there have been scientific studies about how women can push that little bit more after going through labor.
Absolutely. And if you ask most of the mothers who are into an Ironman, they will always say that I'm doing it for my children. Because, somewhere we want, whatever we do, we want our children to have the best version of us as parents. So, they may not even do an Ironman when they grow up. But we want them to remember their mother as somebody who pushed her limits. She did something she was not comfortable with. And, it happens, as you said, your mother was an Ironman triathlete, is a Ironman triathlete. So how did that shape your childhood?
Seeing her go on 7-8 hour rides as a kid, come back, throw up sometimes, sleep in bed. I said, I will never, ever do that in my life. She must be crazy. But then I got the bug. And then at 15 years old, I ran my first marathon. And then a few years later, I was like, okay, I'll do a half Ironman. Then a few years later, it was a full Ironman. Slowly, I got into the sport. But she was there every step of the way. She gave me advice. She was actually in high school. She was my swim coach. She was my cross country coach. Sometimes she helped out with track. So she was there coaching me through the sports, and she's a physical therapist. So she would always help me understand little injuries that I was getting. Sometimes I would get massages. They were lovely. But I cannot thank her enough. In terms of mental strength, just teaching me that physical pain is not something to be feared. It's not a sign that something is wrong with your body. It's great to chase that pain within limits, of course, and to know good pain versus bad pain, to know when an injury is coming and when you should take it easy, when you should rest, how to play, how to have fun, but also how to be disciplined, how to get out there maybe on the days that you're not feeling so great, because after 10 minutes, you might feel perfectly fine. You just got to get out there and try. Yeah.
Very true. You mentioned about those long rides, and every triathlete's family hates those Sunday rides. And, we get up at 5 the night before, we've laid our helmets and everything, and we are off. And when we come back 7 or 8 hours later, we're actually good for nothing.
Yeah.
So how does your family, your husband, react to your long rides?
Trust me, I still have mom guilt. I don't know if all the things that I need to work on with being a mother, mom guilt is number one. And not necessarily because I feel bad that my husband is helping take care of the baby, but because I feel like the baby needs me. And, I'm still breastfeeding her lots, and I will continue that hopefully until she's 2 or 3 years old. I want to keep breastfeeding her. And I'm the only one that can do that. My husband jokes that he'll get a tube, he'll put it through his shirt, and he'll attach it to a bottle, and he'll pump for me. But it's not the same level of comfort that a baby needs the nipple. So for the first 3 months that I was in America, I took the first month pretty much off of strenuous exercise. I was walking postpartum. But then about 6 weeks at my appointment, when they cleared me to exercise again, I was at a cycle class that night. I could not wait any longer because sport is just so integral to my mental health and my physical health as well. So I was able to put Tara in the nursery we have YMCAs that we have big gyms and pools there. So she was in the nursery quite often in the first few months. And then when we came back to India, we didn't have the parental support around us anymore. So we have a nanny who comes and helps us 8 hours a day. We are very adamant about just 8 hours because beyond that, we want to be there fully with the child with all of our attention. And luckily, we have the kinds of jobs that allow us to do that. People who work in offices don't have the same luxury. But my husband's an actor, I'm a writer, so we have a little bit of wiggle room. So within those 8 hours, sometimes I feel like I still get nothing done because every 2 hours I'm interrupted to breastfeed her. I'm cooking lunch, I'm cooking dinner, I'm cleaning the house. There's so many things to do.
Absolutely.
But I always make it a priority to get at least 1 hour to myself, to run, to swim, to cycle, to do yoga, to walk, anything. I just need to get out of the house and do what is good for me, because then I can be at my best for my child and for my husband.
Absolutely. You know, I remember my boys are now grown up, but when they were younger, I remember feeling like a dog on a leash. So you can only go that further and then you have to,
Yes.
you're pulled back.
Yeah, and I'll say that I am also a backpacker, so I'm used to in my previous life, as they say, which I don't agree with. It's all one life. But anyways, I would go out for weeks at a time and backpack. I went on a beautiful trip to Colorado a few years ago, and I was hiking the Collegiate Mountains there. And then I was hiking the mountains to Sea Trail in North Carolina a few years before that, which is about 1,000 miles long. So I was mostly hiking it, a little bit of biking, a little bit of kayaking as well. It's a beautiful trail. But I have had to come to terms with the fact that, for a few years, I might not be able to do that. I want to hike the Appalachian Trail one day. I was supposed to do that, then COVID hit, so it's been on hold for a while. But it's okay. It's okay to have your dreams on hold. It doesn't mean that you're losing yourself, because who you truly are is not what you do, but it's your attitude that you hold in everyday life. It's your spiritual grounding.
Right.
That's who you are. Your relationships with other people, your emotional stability, that makes you you. Not necessarily doing triathlons, not going on long backpacking trips. So that I think is something that's overlooked a lot in motherhood. We don't have to make time for the activities that we used to do. Just, remembering what brings us joy in everyday life.
Right. Absolutely. And I really remember the time when my children were younger. Every single day I would wish that, they become more grown up. They start talking so that they're a little more independent. I can get more time for my work. And now when they're grown up and so tall and they look like men now, I really wish that I had, I could hold on to that time for so much longer.
Yeah. I think that Anjuman also says, I can't wait for her to grow up and speak. And then we catch ourselves and we're like, no, let's just savor these moments right now. I think that ultimately with my daughter, I'd love to have the kind of relationship that I have with my mom, where my mom stays active even today because she wants to play with her children. Mm-hmm. And I'm blessed to be a young mom. I wasn't expecting to get pregnant, but I'm 26 years old now. I know that when my daughter is my age, I will have the strength and the capabilities to go on trails with her, or to go, I don't know, maybe she'll be a dancer. Maybe she'll teach me how to dance. Whatever she wants to do, I'll be there for her. Mm-hmm. And we each have different phases of our relationships with our kid. And yeah, you're right. Savor it while you can. Don't rush it.
You married an actor. So how was it, shifting countries, shifting cultures, and of all things, marrying somebody from Bollywood who's an actor? How is that life turned out for you?
It's much different than my life in North Carolina. I grew up on, I think, 23 acres. Now we have even more because we're by a lake. We're in the middle of the woods. We bought this land to protect it it was going to be turned into a neighborhood. So thankfully my parents had the financial security to buy it as kind of like a wildlife sanctuary, if you will. So I was, falling to sleep to the sounds of crickets every night for the first 18 years of my life. It was absolutely beautiful. And somebody asked me the other day, like, what do you do when you go home? What's the first thing you do when you go home? And it's just savoring the sounds of crickets and the birds waking up in the mornings. And I do miss nature. I miss it a lot. And we intentionally try to go out of the city when we can. And especially now that we have Tara, we're going to prioritize that. We get her out to the park as often as we can. And I think that it's not something necessarily to lament that I'm not in as natural of a setting as I used to be. There's pros and cons to both. I think it was a very easy, luxurious lifestyle in North Carolina. And I'm being challenged to operate differently, to think differently, to think on my toes, to not be so startled by every noise that comes outside our door. You know, sounds of the city are constant, but cities are also what makes our lifestyles in the country possible. So it's not, this is something that took me several years to learn. There's not a right way of living. There's not a wrong way of living. Ultimately, it's how we approach the circumstances that we're given that determine our happiness quotient, that determine how fulfilling we find life. We don't have to fight circumstances that seem uncomfortable. We don't have to have the perfect life and everything that we want laid out around us. Sometimes sacrifice is great. And like you said, my husband is an actor. And there's also, I'll say, a 12 and a half year age difference between us. Mm-hmm. So he had his life fully set. He was, he has his own production house. He's directing films. He's acting in films. He's producing films. He's doing everything. If he could, he would be behind the camera shooting films as well. And, every single role. Mm-hmm. He loves his work. And so for me, it was just a natural choice. I need to come to India to support him. But at the same time, he is so happy to, if the opportunity presents itself, then maybe we'll go to the US, spend some time there. If he gets a role on Broadway or if he starts working in Hollywood, those options are there. At the same time, if I have a big career development, if I need to move back to the US, that's something we're open to doing. And we're going to homeschool our daughter, so that makes it more flexible in terms of her growing up. And I think I shared this with you earlier, actually, that travel is something that I credit for being part of why I'm so flexible and I can be so resilient in my adult life, is because I was blessed to be exposed to different cultures and be exposed to constant movement as a kid. I was an exchange student in Austria, so in high school, 16 years old. So that introduced me to a different way of life there. That's what I want for my child as well. And again, it's such a blessing. I don't take it for granted. Not everybody has these opportunities, and we try to be as mindful and intentional as possible. We don't just go off on vacation to go off on vacation. And ideally, we stay in places longer, develop connections with the people there, give back some way through acts of service. These days, there's so many opportunities to volunteer where you go and travel. So that's something that we're looking forward to doing more of in the future with our daughter.
Absolutely. As they say, it takes a village. It takes a village not only to bring up a child, but it also takes a village behind everybody who's attempted an Ironman. So tell us about your village.
Yeah. Oh, I don't want to, it's like the credits section in a book. It would take pages if I listed everybody out. It starts with my family. My dad does not get enough credit. I think that he was the one who supported my mom during her long training days. And funny story, I was talking about how I was uncomfortable on a bicycle. And I wasn't as a kid. And then there was maybe 3 or 4 years that I didn't really get on a bike at all. And when I went to Austria, I got on a bike and we toured around the town that I was living in. And I noticed that I was a little bit uncomfortable. So I messaged my mom that same day. I said, we need to do a bike trip so I'm not scared of the bike anymore. So we ended up doing a 350-mile ride around Vermont. It took us a week or week and a half. But my dad was the one that was taking our luggage from place to place, meeting us, making sure that we had food, taking us on all the tours of Vermont. So that I have my parents to credit for the joy of exercise, making sure that I was comfortable with exercise and saw it as a part of my everyday life, not something to battle, not something to necessarily, I have to do this as a resolution for New Year's. Okay. It was something that brought me joy. It was naturally a priority. Then moving on, I have all the coaches that I've had throughout my life. Started in swimming, cycling, running, triathlon, my yoga instructors. The first time I came to India was actually for a 500-hour yoga certification course. So I got to spend 8 weeks in Dharamshala and had such lovely instructors there. And that was a mental component that they instilled in me that's brought strength to the sport. Friends, of course, reminding me that triathlon's not life. It's important to have a few friends who are not part of the triathlete community. It can be very fun to get swept away in all of the race planning, but yeah, having a few quote unquote normal friends is important. And now my baby is part of my support crew. Like you said, they're the inspiration for many mothers to pursue the sport. And I've already had that experience in Chattanooga. I felt her presence, even though she couldn't be at the finish line. It was way past her bedtime. But just the other day, I was on a normal training run, 45 minutes, and I saw a girl who was maybe 8 or 9 years old. And I had shivers run down my spine because I felt, wow, I'm a mom. And I feel like I'm doing the right thing, being active for my baby.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you become a mom. You see a small puppy, you see a small cat, and anything and everything, every child of every animal reminds you of your own.
Yes.
Absolutely. It was really so much fun to talk to you. It was such a long cherished dream. I remember you had that DNF at Israel, and I have been intrigued by you ever since. And then I saw that picture of you finishing the Ironman so beautifully, all the while, taking care of your baby, pumping milk on the way, and actually doing something which is so terribly difficult. But these are some acts which actually pave the path for many, many women. You may not even know them. But that one picture is probably going to inspire many, many women down the way. So thank you so much. And I really feel lucky to be, here with you talking for this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I add one small thing?
Yes, you must.
I feel like I've not said enough about my husband, how wonderful he's been with all of my training.
Yeah, so we should.
Yeah, I feel like it's so important for anybody listening. I hope that a few men are listening to this podcast as well, because he has been so wonderful in not just making sure that I got out the door for training, but also making sure that I was mentally at peace and happy with my day, and emotionally. He was the one that was always getting up at night and putting Tara back in the crib so that I could get some sleep. He knew what tolls I was going through with breastfeeding, and there's just so much communication that needs to happen. Every woman is different, every pregnancy is different, and he was wonderful about asking me, what do I need and how he could best support me. So I think that, more than just inspiring women, I hope that my story is not just my story, it's our family's story. And I hope that it can inspire other families to, pursue healthy relationships with one another and understand that it's a new phase of life. Of course, things will get challenging after becoming a mother. Challenging doesn't necessarily mean that it's a headache, though. It's a great opportunity for growth, to grow in your relationship with your husband, with your wife, with your daughters, with your parents. Yeah, I think
the beauty of men who support their wives, usually in present day, you are supported when you are out at work. Most of the husbands today, in whatever country we are in, they'll support their wives when they go to work. They'll support their wives in household work. But when you pursue a passion like triathlon, which actually takes up so much of your time and energy, and also so much of your family time and family's energy, there are very few men who will rise up to the occasion.
Yeah.
And it may not be, actually verbally saying that, you should not do this or why are you doing this. It could be very, very non-verbal communication, which can, just put you off.
Bringing a glass of electrolytes.
Yes.
That's all that can make my day. My husband did that yesterday, and yeah, agreed.
So I think it's so important, if we want to see more women on the road, if we want to see more women fulfilled in their lives, doing what they want. Maybe they just want to stay at home and be a mom. Maybe they want to do a triathlon. Maybe they want to have a baby. If we want to see more women fulfilled, the way to it starts from men actually wholeheartedly supporting them. And it actually cuts both ways.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. It was actually a wonderful and lovely conversation. And I'm sure so many women out there will feel inspired to take that first step. It need not be a triathlon. It could be any impossible dream that you're chasing. And I'm sure Sierra's story will inspire you to find your Ironman and finish it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.